Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this episode of Spreadsheet Gaming. In this episode, we're going to be starting a brand new series with D100 Dungeon. Now, the first thing I need to grab is going to be the name, the hero path, and the race. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Now that we have that, I want to come back over here and I want to start with the strength, dexterity, and intelligence. Now I want to set these hero paths and race in a column format. This way I'll be able to stack things underneath it as needed later. Things like my stats and equipment, skills, all the other things we're going to be tracking. Now at this point, we're going to move strength, dexterity, and intelligence over to the side. We're going to change our minds later and move it back down to the bottom just to give ourselves more room and more space. But I did want to keep this part in just so I could show you guys exactly what we're doing. We're including the primary section, the adjusted section, and the total. We are going to go ahead and total out that formula in just a little bit. But at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to add an experience section. We're going to add a bunch of checkboxes, and the easiest way to do that is to you can hold shift and just kind of drag it along by hitting the arrow keys or your mouse. Go into the insert section and you can insert checkboxes that way. And then all I did here was copy and paste and then add the 2 extra columns that I needed. Now I'm going to add an extra column, and I'm going to call this the total, because what we're going to do is we're going to set up a counting formula to count all of the boxes in this next area. And this way, it'll tell us when we reach 10 experience, it's time to level up. So we're going to start with the count if formula, which we select the area, and then we decide if it's true. If it's true, then we will count. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy that formula down. And as you can see, we're testing it here. We're going to see if it goes up to the number that we want it to do. Now I'm going to spend a moment here just cleaning up the sheet a little bit, resizing it so that the boxes make a little bit more sense. And we want to go ahead and highlight that. We want to do some conditional formatting. So the easiest way to do that is to go into conditional formatting like that. We're going to change it to is equal to the number 10. And then we're just going to go ahead and pick a random color here. I just picked this kind of, sunflower yellow. But if we go ahead and check every single box that we have in our row, that's going to go ahead and highlight the number, telling us that it is time to go ahead and level up. Now this next section involves setting up an if formula so that we can get Mighty Blow, Perfect Aim, and spell casting into our character sheet, but only if we meet the condition. So we'll go ahead and make a new column to house our if formula. We'll call it ability. And then what we're going to do is we will start that if formula. It's going to say if that primary stat, and we're going to change it to be total later, but if that stat is equal to or greater than 50, then I want to see the name of the ability, which in our case is Mighty Blow. And then at the end of that formula, we're going to put a empty space, because basically what we're saying is if the ability is above 50, show me that. Otherwise, don't show me anything. We're going to finish with dexterity. And the easiest way for me to do this is just to copy the same formula, drag it down because it's already how I need it to be, and then simply update it to say perfect aim or spellcasting in the case of intelligence. So that's just what I go ahead and do here. Now in this part of the video, I remember that I have to go ahead and add both the primary and the adjusted into a total. So I move the if formula to check the total column instead. And then the next thing I do is in that total column, I go ahead and set up the sum formula. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to add up both the primary and the adjusted and in that total. So if we get bonuses or penalties, we can just go ahead and adjust those as needed. And then as a result of that, we're going to go ahead and test it and just make sure, like when we type in 50 there, and then we add these together, not add these together, but, you know, sum up that column. And the nice thing about sheets is, as you guys can see here, it's showing off, suggesting rather, which ones we should use. I go ahead and I paste the formula on down, and that sets up everything we need. We know our formula works good. We can see Mighty Blow, Perfect Aim, and Spellcaster. And just to make the sheet a little bit prettier, I go ahead and bold out the header row, and I bold out my those extra sections of the character sheet. And the easiest way to do that is by highlighting and hitting Control and B. We rename the current sheet that we're on Adventure Sheet so that we can match the name that we see from the character sheet. I'm going to add the HP section from the character sheet onto mine now. We'll also add Rep, Fate, and Life to this section now. And that allows us to go ahead and move on to the Items section. So we're going to start by making the Roll column, and we're going to use a formula to help us do this as well. We'll start by naming our column, Roll D10, and then we're going to start, like every formula, with the equal sign. We'll type in equals sequence. And since we're just looking for numbers 1 through 10, we'll type in 10. That'll immediately give us all the numbers we need. Now I'm going to copy those numbers. I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and V to paste just the values, because the problem is that formula gives us all the numbers that we need, but if I were to make any changes to any of the numbers below, it would basically, the formula would completely mess up at that point. So then the next step I want to do is I go ahead and center all these numbers to make it just kind of easier on my eyes to look at. And you can find that at the top part of your screen, as you can see as in my picture here. Now we're filling out all of the damage modifiers from the adventure sheet. So 3 to the head, 2 to the back, and so forth. And then once I get those numbers filled out, we finish off by putting in all of the names of the armor sections. Follow that up by putting all of the further statistics in: strength, dex, int, HP, so on and so forth. Then we'll start a damage tracker for all of these items. If you guys are familiar, that's a big part of the game, kind of switching back and forth between items and letting them take damage instead of you so that you don't die in your adventures. So we'll go ahead and set that tracker up. And then you can also see me using autofill here. I started by typing in damage 1, damage 2. I moused over to the corner and then dragged the mouse over 4 more places, which filled it up to damage 6. And I'm wanting to set up the same count if formula that I had set up for the experience tracker, but this time we're going to do it for damage. We're going to check all of those boxes to see if they're true. And for each one that's true, it's going to count. And we'll also go ahead and set up conditional formatting. We're going to highlight the entire section that we want to go ahead and update. And I'm going to go down to conditional formatting here. And we want that if the number is equal to or greater than 6, then we want it highlighted. And I went ahead and went with orange on this one because I feel like the red is a little harsh, at least for my eyeballs. But as you guys can see here, we've got the formula all ready to go. And then once I check all of them there, you can see that it highlights as needed, and only if we fill up that particular row. If it's not all the way filled up, it's not going to go off. And a quick and easy way to instantly check and uncheck everything, guys, mouse over the whole thing, hit spacebar. I'm going to finish off the item section here for the neck slot and the 2 ring slots. Now we're going to add borders to our sheet to make it look a little closer to the adventure sheet. So up here at the top, we click on where the border section goes. I'm going to add one just there at the bottom. And then just like the sheet, I'm going to do additional borders for the ring and the neck. And instead of this one just being a bottom border, this one ended up being surrounding the entire thing, just to look a little closer to the adventure sheet. Now we're going to add the skills. And once we get through all the skills, we're going to set up the level section, and then we need to set up experience. And just like we did for our strength, int, and dexterity, we're going to do the same thing for all of our skills. We're going to add all these checkboxes, and we'll just copy the rows, paste them on down. We'll set up a count formula, just like we did earlier. Count if true, and it's going to check each row, and we'll copy that. We'll paste it on down to the bottom of all these rows. We are all set on that front. And you guys know how I like to do things. I like to center all these numbers, and I'd also like to set up the same formatting that we've been setting up. Once we get to that magic number of 10, then I want that number to, I want that cell to highlight and tell us that it's time to level up. And I just ended up going with the default soft beige color, whatever you want to call it. But obviously, your mileage may vary. Feel free to pick whatever color works for you guys. Now, for the next part of this video, I messed up, and I guess I paused the recording when I added in the section where I added in the stars, because in D100 Dungeon, some of your skills and some of your stats are starred. And so in those instances, you get bonus experience. And so what I want to set up here is I'm going to set up conditional formatting. And what you're going to notice is that the spreadsheet will have the extra section called stars. And all I really needed to do was copy and paste from experience, move that all one cell over, and then, well, not copy and paste, actually. We wanted to cut and paste to move that over. Once that was done, I just added one more column called star, and then added all the boxes afterwards. Now, this conditional formatting is going to look a little different than the ones that we've been doing, because what I want to do for this one is I actually want to highlight the entire row if I just check the star box there. I want it very clear that the entire thing needs to have 2 experience every time we level up. And so the way that we need to do that is we need to set up a custom formula, and the custom formula needs to look like the following. And what's going on here is we have the $sign by the C. This is what's called an absolute reference. And what that does is it says don't check any other cell if we copy this formula up and down, and it highlights everything that is in the C column. And I just went ahead and changed the color here to like a nice yellow, but as you can see here, we check the star, we can check any of the boxes, and it'll highlight the entire row to make it nice and flashy and apparent to me that the skill is worth 2 experience each time. Now the same thing needs to happen for strength, intelligence, and dexterity. So I'm cleaning it up on the top here. I had to add a column, and sometimes, guys, when you do that, it does kind of mess up any other columns that you have down below. So just make sure that when you are doing this, you do have to come in and fix it. As you guys can see here, I've got a bunch of errors in here. I did have to go in and ensure that the count was continuing on to the correct cells. And then once I did that, I just copied and pasted on down, and we're back in business. So everything's good there. But like I said, just kind of some extra little work that you have to keep in mind while you guys are kind of making adjustments to your sheet as needed. And this is also something that is frequent when it comes to working on spreadsheets. You're going to find a lot of it is, okay, I got to fix this. Okay, I got to redo this. And why didn't that work the way I expected it to? You guys are going to run into that problem a lot. Don't get discouraged. Just kind of think about it for a second. If you really can't figure it out, Google it. Maybe you can use AI, whatever the case may be. But a lot of the solutions are just because you put the greater than sign on the wrong side of the equal sign, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of trial and error that comes with making these spreadsheets. So don't get discouraged if you guys are working on it and something doesn't work exactly the way you expect it to. All right, now we're going to go ahead and add belt slots to our sheet. This isn't the final place, so I'm going to leave it. I end up moving it to the side just so that I have a little bit more room down here. But we're adding a section for 1 through 2, well, 1 through 10, we'll just put it that way. And then I'm also going to show off merge and centering here. So basically, because the belt slot is taking up all 5 of those cells, I'm just going to go ahead and merge all those cells by clicking on the merge button up at the top and then doing centering afterwards. If you guys are following along in Excel, Excel has a single button that does that, so you don't have to do the 2 steps like here, like I did in Sheets. And then the next step is I'm going to actually name this range. I'm going to call this belt underscore slots. You can't add a space. That's why you guys saw that error there. And what that allows me to do is that allows me to go to the belt slot from any section on the sheet. I can be here. I can be 6 or 7 tabs away, 1,000 cells over. Doesn't matter. I can immediately get back to any named section that I name. So in this case, I'm going to name a couple different ones. The first one is going to be belt slots. I'll show you guys the second one here in just a little bit. And then once I get the belt slots moved over to the side, I test it by adding the slots that they would be filled with, rather the potions that they would be filled with. And then I just kind of resize it a little bit just to test it. But just keep in mind, you might have to also readjust the name slot. I did have to readjust it a little bit. It didn't quite go where it was supposed to on that one. So just bear that in mind if you guys are making any changes like that. Continuing on with our character sheet, we're going to make a keys, levers, disease, and poison section down at the bottom. And just like most of the other things that we've made so far, we are going to go ahead and set them up with a count if formula, and we're going to see if those checkboxes are true. That's one of the nice things about Google Sheets is we make it nice and easy here. I'm also going to set up a little bit of a barrier or a border that's, custom made to whatever size I want. It doesn't have to be just the lines between cells. I just kind of resized the entire row as I needed and then filled it up with black. And this is where we set up that count if formula, where we are going to total up the boxes that are true or the boxes that are checked, just like we did for the other experience trackers that we've already done. Now for this section of the character sheet, we're going to go ahead and set up the time tracker, and that tracker is going 1 through 12. So I'm going to take a minute here to set that up. Now that we've got all the numbers where we need it, I'm going to add the check boxes here. And this is where we're getting ready to do one of the more complicated formulas that you guys are probably used to dealing with. We're starting with the ifs formula, and we're combining that with the count ifs formula that we've been using for experience. Now with ifs formula, it checks each of the conditions that you put there in order. So if you guys are looking at the first one that we have set up, we have count if equals 1. So basically if we check that whole range and we only find 1, then we're going to say oil. And then the next step, if we check for 3 and only 3, then we will find a wandering monster on 4. We're trying to set this up so that it tells us, based on how many checks we have, what we should be doing, whether we're checking for wandering monsters, checking for oil, so on and so forth. And you guys can see all the different numbers that we have there. I'd recommend adding them however you see fit, but this is how we ended up doing it. So again, the key thing here, guys, make sure you go from 3 all the way down to 12 in order, because that is how the ifs formula is going to check for all of that. Now, at the very end of that ifs formula, I've closed it off by saying true. And basically what that does is it says if you look through all of these conditions and you can't find any of them, then what are you going to do? That's essentially what happens when we say true. And then what I did was I put an empty space between quotation marks, which basically tells the cell to make it empty. Now the next step here is that we are adding a section for oil and food. We're doing this so that if we need to check for, keep track of how much oil that we have over the course of a day, we can go ahead and do that. Usually what I end up doing is once I get through an entire turn track, so once I get through 12 turns, I add 3 to the oil column and 1 to the food column, and then just kind of go from there. And then the next step here is I am setting up another if formula so that I can basically split up the number that comes if I ever see wandering monster. into this other column. And then what we're going to do is we're going to roll against that number. And if that roll is less than or equal to the wandering monster, then we're going to run into it. Now, the way we set this up is we create a value formula and we combine it with the right formula. And the reason we do this is when we set up the ifs formula and we put everything in quotation marks, it doesn't recognize the number at the end as an actual number. It thinks of it as what is called a string. A string is just another way of saying something that you can't do math with, but you can otherwise look at. So what we did there is we turned that string 4 into the value 4. And now what we're doing is we're creating an ifs formula that is going to check that column we made previously. If it has wandering monster on 4, it's going to randomly roll between 1 and 10. If it has wandering monster on 5, it's going to do the same thing. Wandering monster on 6, it's going to do the same thing. And then last but not least, if it's true, it's going to just be a blank space. So in other words, if none of the other conditions happen, it's going to be a blank space. And now for the last part of this video, I just wanted to go ahead and show off the conditional formatting that we set up. We did have to do absolute references for the entire thing in order for it to work properly. So in other words, I had to say, do not change from cell S37 and do not change from, I think it was Q34. And that was the way to get this formula to work properly. And it is a custom formula that works beyond what the normal conditional formatting checks are. Some of the checks were as simple as a greater than check, but in this particular case, we wanted 2 cells to check against one another, so that's why we had to make it a little bit more complicated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this first episode. This first episode in this series of Spreadsheet Gaming for D100 Dungeon. I hope to see you guys in our next episode, where we will be adding things like the combat sheet and adventure logs and that sort of thing, but that'll be for next time. All right, guys, have a wonderful day.